Picture this. You're alone in an elevator. The doors close with that familiar ding. But then, something goes wrong. The lights flicker. The elevator stops between floors. And you realize you're not alone anymore. What I'm about to share with you are 4 true stories that will make you think twice before stepping into an elevator alone. These aren't urban legends. These aren't creepypastas. These are real experiences from real people who lived through absolute terror in those metal boxes we trust with our lives every single day. Before we begin, I need to warn you. If you're watching this alone, maybe turn on some lights. If you're in an elevator right now, well, maybe wait until you reach your floor. Because what you're about to hear will change how you see elevators forever. Are you ready? Because once we start this journey, there's no going back. These are 4 true scary elevator horror stories that will haunt your dreams. Sarah Martinez was a security guard at the Meridian office complex in downtown Chicago. It was October 2019, and she had been working the night shift for 3 months. The job was simple enough: patrol the building, check the floors, make sure everything was secure. But what happened to her on the night of October 15th would change her life forever. The Meridian building was 42 floors of glass and steel, built in the 1980s. During the day, it buzzed with activity. Lawyers, accountants, consultants, all rushing between meetings. But at night? At night, it was a different world. The halls echoed with every footstep. The fluorescent lights hummed with an unsettling frequency. And the elevators had a mind of their own. Sarah always started her rounds at midnight. She would take elevator number 3, the one on the east side of the building, up to the top floor and work her way down. It was routine. Boring, even. Until that night. She pressed the call button for elevator 3. The familiar ding echoed through the empty lobby. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh. Sarah stepped inside, her flashlight clipped to her belt, her radio crackling softly with static. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The elevator began its ascent. Floor 2, floor 3, floor 4. Everything was normal. Sarah checked her phone, 7 a.m. She was making good time. But then, between the 15th and 16th floors, something happened. The elevator shuddered. Not violently, but enough to make Sarah look up from her phone. The lights flickered once, twice. Then they went out completely. The elevator came to a complete stop. Sarah pressed the emergency button. Nothing. She tried her radio. Static. Her cell phone showed no signal. She was trapped, suspended somewhere between the 15th and 16th floors of an empty office building in the middle of the night. But that's when she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. Humming. Someone was humming a children's lullaby, and it was coming from above her. Now, let me explain something about elevators. The space above the elevator car is called the hoistway. It's cramped, dangerous, and absolutely no place for a person to be. There are cables, counterweights, machinery, all moving parts that could crush someone in seconds. No maintenance worker would ever be up there at midnight. No one should have been up there. But someone was humming. The melody was "Rockabye Baby," but it was wrong, distorted, like it was being hummed by someone with their mouth full of water. Sarah pressed herself against the wall of the elevator. Her breathing became shallow. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure whoever was up there could hear it. The humming continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the humming. Sarah strained to listen. Nothing. Just the sound of her own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. That's when the elevator car began to shake. Not the mechanical shudder from before. This was different. This was rhythmic. like someone was jumping. Above her, in the hoistway. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed through the metal shaft. Sarah grabbed the handrail as the elevator swayed slightly with each impact. Whatever was up there was heavy, and it was moving around. Sarah's training kicked in. She needed to get out. She needed to call for help. She pried at the elevator doors with her fingers, but they wouldn't budge. She pressed every button on the panel. Nothing worked. The thuding stopped. For a moment, Sarah thought it was over. Maybe whatever was up there had moved on. Maybe it was just her imagination, heightened by the darkness and isolation. But then she heard something that made her stomach drop. Scratching. Like fingernails on metal. Long, deliberate scrapes coming from directly above her head. And then, a voice. Muffled, but unmistakably human. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The voice was sing-song, like a child asking to come inside from the rain, but there was something wrong with it. Something wet and gurgling. "Let me in, Sarah. I know you're in there, Sarah." It knew her name. Sarah had never been more terrified in her life. She pressed herself into the corner of the elevator, making herself as small as possible. The scratching continued. The voice continued its chant. "Let me in, Sarah. Open the door, Sarah. I just want to play, Sarah." Suddenly, the lights came back on. The elevator lurched back to life with a mechanical whir. Sarah felt it begin to move upward. Floor 16, floor 17. The voice stopped. The scratching stopped. Everything was normal again. The elevator reached the 42nd floor with its usual cheerful ding. The doors opened onto the empty executive floor. Sarah stumbled out, her legs shaking, her shirt soaked with sweat. She immediately called her supervisor. Then the police. An emergency maintenance crew was brought in to inspect the elevator shaft. What they found chilled everyone to the bone. In the hoistway above Elevator 3, they discovered scratches in the metal, deep gouges that looked like they had been made by human fingernails. There were also stains on the cables and machinery. Dark stains that the police later confirmed were blood. But here's the thing that haunts Sarah to this day. The building's security footage showed something impossible. The cameras that monitor the elevator shafts showed Sarah's elevator stopped between floors 15 and 16 for exactly 37 minutes. But the cameras showed something else. The hoistway above her elevator was empty, completely empty. There was no one up there. No one humming, no one jumping, no one scratching. Sarah quit her job the next day. But before she left, she did some research on the building's history. What she found explained everything and nothing at the same time. In 1987, during the building's construction, a worker named Michael Chen fell down the elevator shaft of what would become Elevator 3. He died instantly. His body wasn't discovered for 3 days because he had been working alone, against safety protocols. The accident report noted that Michael had been humming while he worked. His co-workers always remembered him humming children's songs. His favorite was "Rock-a-Bye Baby." Sarah still lives in Chicago, but she hasn't set foot in an elevator since that night. She takes the stairs everywhere, 20 floors, 30 floors, it doesn't matter. Because she knows that sometimes the dead don't stay buried. Sometimes they get trapped in the spaces between floors, waiting for someone to let them in. And they know your name. That was just the beginning. Because what happened to Sarah pales in comparison to what I'm about to tell you next. If you thought being trapped with a ghost was terrifying, wait until you hear about being trapped with something much worse. Something alive. Something human. This next story takes place in New York City, in one of those old apartment buildings where the walls are thin and the elevators are even thinner, where neighbors barely know each other, and strangers can become your worst nightmare. Jennifer Walsh moved to Manhattan in March 2020. right before the world changed forever. She found a small, one-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side in a pre-war building called the Ashford. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. The building had character, high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and an old-fashioned elevator with a brass gate that you had to close manually. The Ashford was home to about 30 families across 6 floors. Jennifer lived on the 4th floor in apartment 4A. Across the hall was 4B, which had been empty since she moved in. The landlord, Mr. Kowalski, told her the previous tenant had left suddenly, breaking their lease. He seemed eager to change the subject whenever she asked about it. At first, Jennifer loved the building. Her neighbors were quiet. The elderly woman in 3C, Mrs. Chen, always smiled when they passed in the hallway. The young couple in 5A nodded politely. It felt like a real community in a city where community was rare. But then strange things started happening. It began with the elevator. Jennifer would call for it, and when the doors opened, it would smell wrong. Not like the usual mixture of cleaning supplies and old wood, but something else. Something organic and unpleasant, like someone had been eating raw meat inside. She mentioned it to Mrs. Chen one day. The older woman's face went pale. "You smell it too?" Mrs. Chen whispered, looking around as if someone might be listening. "I thought I was imagining things." Then Jennifer started hearing sounds from across the hall. Apartment 4B was supposed to be empty, but late at night, she could hear movement, footsteps, the creak of floorboards. Sometimes, what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. She called Mr. Kowalski several times. He insisted the apartment was vacant and promised to check it out. But nothing changed. The sounds continued. The night everything changed was a Tuesday in September. Jennifer was coming home from her job at a marketing firm. It was around 11 p.m., and the building was quiet. She used her key to enter the lobby and called for the elevator. When the doors opened, someone was already inside. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with greasy brown hair that hung in strings around his face. His clothes looked like he had been wearing them for weeks, a stained white t-shirt and jeans that were more dirt than denim. But it was his eyes that made Jennifer's stomach turn. They were too wide, too bright, and they never seemed to blink. "Going up?" he asked, his voice rough like he had been smoking for decades. Jennifer hesitated. Everything in her gut told her to wait for the next elevator, to make an excuse, to run. But it was late. She was tired, and she lived in New York City. You encountered strange people every day. This was just another one. "4th floor," she said, stepping inside. The man pressed the button for the 4th floor. His fingernails were long and dirty, with what looked like dried blood underneath them. Jennifer pressed herself against the far wall of the elevator, clutching her purse tightly. The elevator began its slow ascent. 1st floor, 2nd floor. The man stared at her the entire time, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. "You live in 4A, he said. It wasn't a question. Jennifer's blood ran cold. How did he know which apartment was hers? She had never seen him before in her life. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're neighbors," he replied. "I'm in 4B." But that was impossible. Apartment 4B was empty. Mr. Kowalski had told her so multiple times. She had never seen any moving trucks, never heard the sounds of someone actually living there during normal hours. "4B is vacant," Jennifer said carefully. The man's smile widened, showing teeth that were stained yellow and brown. "Is it?" 3rd floor. The elevator was moving so slowly. Jennifer watched the floor indicator, willing it to move faster. Just one more floor. Just get to the 4th floor, and she could escape. But then the elevator shuddered and stopped. Between the 3rd and 4th floors, the lights flickered but stayed on. Jennifer pressed the button for the 4th floor repeatedly. Nothing happened. "Looks like we're stuck," the man said. and his voice had changed. It was lower now, more menacing. The fake friendliness was gone. Jennifer immediately pressed the emergency button. She could hear an alarm ringing somewhere in the building, but it sounded far away and muffled. "Help is coming," she said, more to reassure herself than to make conversation. "I don't think so," the man replied. "I cut the phone line to the emergency system this morning, and the building's pretty old. Thick walls. No one's going to hear you scream." That's when Jennifer realized she wasn't dealing with a strange neighbor. She was trapped in an elevator with a predator. Someone who had been watching her, learning her schedule, planning this moment. She pulled out her cell phone. No signal. The elevator was acting like a metal cage, blocking all communication with the outside world. "I've been watching you, Jennifer," the man said, taking a step closer. "I know you leave for work at 8:15 every morning. I know you come home around 11 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know you order Chinese food every Sunday night and eat it while watching romantic comedies." Jennifer's hands shook as she held her phone. How long had he been watching her? How had she never noticed? "I know you sleep with your bedroom window open," he continued. "I know you sing in the shower. I know you cry sometimes when you think no one can hear you." Jennifer looked around the elevator desperately. It was small, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The emergency hatch in the ceiling was too high to reach, and even if she could reach it, she'd be climbing into a dark shaft with this man right behind her. She had to think. She had to be smart. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "I want to be close to you," he said. "I want to know everything about you. I want to taste your fear." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made Jennifer's legs go weak. A knife. It wasn't large, but it was sharp, and the blade gleamed in the elevator's fluorescent light. But Jennifer wasn't going to go down without a fight. She had taken self-defense classes in college. She knew that predators like this counted on their victims being paralyzed by fear. When he lunged at her with a knife, she was ready. She grabbed his wrist with both hands and drove her knee up into his groin as hard as she could. He doubled over, gasping, and dropped the knife. It clattered to the elevator floor. Jennifer dove for the knife, but the man recovered faster than she expected. He grabbed her ankle and pulled her back. She kicked at his face with her free foot, connecting with his nose. Blood spurted across the elevator walls. "You little bitch!" he screamed, his voice no longer human but animalistic. Jennifer managed to get her hands on the knife. She spun around, holding it in front of her like a shield. "Stay back," she yelled. "Stay the hell back." But the man wasn't intimidated. Blood streaming from his broken nose, he smiled that horrible smile again. "You can't kill me, Jennifer. You're too nice. Too sweet. Too weak." He rushed at her again, and Jennifer didn't hesitate. She thrust the knife forward with all her strength. It went into his stomach, and he stopped moving immediately. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. "I'm not weak," Jennifer whispered. The man collapsed to the floor of the elevator, blood pooling beneath him. Jennifer pressed herself against the wall, still holding the knife, waiting to see if he would get up again. He didn't. 20 minutes later, Jennifer heard voices outside the elevator. The building's maintenance man had finally gotten the emergency system working and called the fire department. They pried open the doors and found Jennifer, alive but traumatized, standing over the body of her attacker. The police investigation revealed the terrifying truth. The man's name was Marcus Webb, and he had a long history of stalking and assault. He had been squatting in apartment 4B for 3 months, entering through a fire escape window that didn't lock properly. He had been living there the entire time Jennifer thought the apartment was empty, watching her through the peephole in his door, learning her routines, planning his attack. When police searched apartment 4B, they found journals filled with detailed observations about Jennifer and several other women in the building. They found photographs taken with a telephoto lens through windows. They found plans for attacks that he had never carried out. And they found something else. In the closet of apartment 4B, they found clothes and personal items belonging to the previous tenant, the woman who had supposedly broken her lease and left suddenly. Sarah Kim's body was never found, but the police are certain that Marcus Webb killed her before Jennifer moved into the building. He had been living in that apartment, surrounded by his victim's belongings, for months. Jennifer moved out of the Ashford the next week. She lives in a doorman building now, with modern elevators and security cameras. She's in therapy, learning to deal with the nightmares and panic attacks. But sometimes, when she's in an elevator, she still checks to make sure she's alone. Because she learned that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones that live in haunted buildings or ancient graveyards. The most dangerous monsters are the ones that look human, the ones that live across the hall, the ones that watch you when you think you're safe, the ones that know your name. Two stories down, and we're only getting started. What you've heard so far might make you think twice about who you share an elevator with. But what if I told you that sometimes the elevator itself is the monster? What if the building you trust with your life every day has been keeping secrets for decades? Our third story takes us to a place where elevators aren't just transportation, they're death traps with a taste for blood, and some debts can never be paid in full. The Hartley Hotel in downtown Portland had been a landmark since 1923. 12 stories of Art Deco elegance. It had hosted movie stars, politicians, and writers during its golden age. But by 2018, the hotel had seen better days. The wallpaper was faded, the carpets were worn, and the elevators had developed some peculiar habits. David Kim was a maintenance engineer for Morrison Building Services. He specialized in older buildings, the kind with character, history, and more than their fair share of problems. When the Hartley Hotel called about issues with their main elevator, David thought it would be a routine job. He was wrong. The hotel manager, Patricia Wells, met David in the lobby on a gray October morning. She was a woman in her 60s who had worked at the Hartley for over 30 years. She knew every creak, every groan, every quirk of the old building. "I need to warn you," she said as they walked toward the elevator bank. "The main elevator has been acting up." "What kind of acting up?" David asked, opening his toolkit. Patricia hesitated. "It's been stopping on the 7th floor, even when no one presses the button, even when no one calls for it. And sometimes people hear things." David had heard similar stories before. Old buildings, old elevators, strange noises. It usually came down to worn cables, faulty wiring, or settling foundations. Nothing a good maintenance check couldn't fix. The main elevator was a beautiful piece of 1920s craftsmanship, brass fixtures, mahogany panels, an ornate mirror that had probably reflected the faces of thousands of guests over the decades. David started with a basic inspection, checking the cables, testing the buttons, examining the motor. Everything looked normal. "Tell me about the 7th floor," David said as he worked. Patricia's face darkened. "We don't rent rooms on the 7th floor anymore. Haven't for 15 years. "Why not?" "Too many incidents. Guests complained about strange sounds, cold spots. Some claimed they saw things that couldn't be there. The final straw was when a guest fell down the main staircase. She swore something pushed her, but the security cameras showed she was alone." David nodded politely. He had heard ghost stories about every old building he'd ever worked on. Superstition was common in places with history. But he was a man of science. And science could explain everything. "I'd like to take a look at the 7th floor," he said, "just to check the elevator mechanics from that level." Patricia handed him a keyring with obvious reluctance. "Room 712 has the access panel for the elevator shaft." "But David, Be careful up there, and don't stay long." David took the main elevator to the 7th floor. The ride was smooth, normal. The elevator dinged cheerfully as it reached the 7th floor, and the doors opened onto a hallway that looked frozen in time. The carpet was deep red, faded with age. The wallpaper showed Art Deco patterns in gold and burgundy. Wall sconces provided dim lighting, casting long shadows between the doors. It was like stepping back into the 1920s. But something felt wrong. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe. There was a smell David couldn't identify, something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. And it was cold. Much colder than the rest of the building. David walked down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the old carpet. The door numbers were brass, tarnished with age. 701, 703, 705. He noticed that all the even-numbered rooms were on the left, odd numbers on the right. Standard hotel layout. Room 712 was at the end of the hall. David unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was empty except for dust-covered furniture and an access panel on the far wall. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, creating patterns on the hardwood floor. He opened the access panel and began checking the elevator mechanisms. The cables looked good. The counterweights were properly balanced. The emergency brakes were functional. Everything was exactly as it should be. That's when he heard the elevator moving. David stepped back into the hallway and watched the floor indicator above the elevator doors. The elevator was going down. 2nd floor, 1st floor, basement. Then it started coming back up. But David hadn't called for it, and according to Patricia, the hotel was nearly empty during the day. Only a few long-term residents and the staff. The elevator reached the 7th floor and dinged. The doors opened. It was empty. David stared into the empty elevator car. The brass fixtures gleamed. The mahogany panels reflected the hallway lights. The ornate mirror showed his own face, looking confused and slightly concerned. He was about to step inside when he noticed something odd. In the mirror, behind his reflection, he could see the hallway. But there was something that shouldn't be there. A woman in a 1920s dress, standing by room 705, staring directly at him. David spun around. The hallway was empty. He looked back at the mirror. Nothing. Just his own reflection and the empty hallway behind him. Stress, he muttered to himself. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. But as David stepped into the elevator to go back downstairs, something went wrong. He pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The elevator began to move. But instead of going down, it went up. David watched the floor indicator in confusion. The Hartley Hotel only had 12 floors, but the indicator kept climbing. 13th floor, 14th floor, 15th floor. This was impossible. The building didn't have floors above the 12th. The elevator finally stopped. The indicator showed the 18th floor. The doors opened. David stepped out into a hallway that looked exactly like the 7th floor, but wrong somehow. The carpet was the same deep red, but it seemed to pulse like a living thing. The wallpaper showed the same Art Deco patterns, but they moved and shifted when he wasn't looking directly at them. And the smell was stronger here, that sweet, cloying scent of rotting flowers. David walked down the hallway, his mind reeling. This was impossible. Buildings didn't have secret floors. Elevators didn't travel to places that didn't exist. But then he saw the room numbers, and everything became clear. The doors were numbered, but not in any sequence that made sense. 712, 105, 847, 23. Random numbers scattered across doors that stretched down an impossibly long hallway. And from behind each door came sounds. Crying, laughing, screaming. The sounds of people in agony, trapped forever behind doors that would never open. David ran back to the elevator, but the doors were closed. He pressed the call button frantically, but nothing happened. The elevator was gone, leaving him stranded on a floor that shouldn't exist. That's when he heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps coming from the darkness at the far end of the corridor. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the woman he had seen in the mirror, the woman in the 1920s dress. But up close, he could see that something was terribly wrong with her. Her face was pale as porcelain, but cracked like an old doll. Her eyes were completely black, reflecting nothing. And when she smiled, her teeth were stained with something dark and wet. "Welcome to the 18th floor," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the corridor. "I'm Eleanor Hartley. I built this hotel with my husband in 1923. David backed against the elevator doors. Eleanor Hartley died in 1925. I read about it in the building's history. Did I? Eleanor asked, tilting her head like a curious bird. Or did I just change? The Hartley Hotel is special, David, Eleanor continued, gliding closer without seeming to move her feet. It's alive. It feeds on the despair of its guests, the fear of its visitors. And every few years, it needs something more substantial. David pounded on the elevator doors with his fists. "Let me out of here." "The hotel has been hungry lately," Eleanor said, ignoring his panic. "The 7th floor used to provide enough sustenance, but people stopped staying there, stopped being afraid. The hotel needs fresh terror, David, fresh souls. You see, the 18th floor is where we keep our permanent guests," Eleanor explained. "People who checked in but never checked out. People who took elevators that brought them exactly where the hotel wanted them to go." David could hear the sounds behind the doors more clearly now. Voices calling for help, begging to be released, screaming in languages he didn't recognize. Some of the voices sounded recent. Others seemed to echo from decades past. "Room 1847 just became available," Eleanor said, pointing to a door near the end of the hallway. "The previous occupant finally wore out. You'd be perfect for that room, David. A nice, strong fear to feed on for years to come." But David wasn't going to become another permanent guest of the Hartley Hotel. As Eleanor reached for him with fingers that were too long and too pale, he noticed something. The elevator floor indicator was flickering. The elevator was coming back. David shoved Eleanor aside and dove for the elevator doors as they opened. But instead of an empty car, the elevator was full of people, dozens of them, all wearing clothes from different eras. All with the same pale, cracked faces and black eyes as Eleanor. "Going down?" asked a man in a 1940s suit, his voice a dry whisper. But David had no choice. He pushed through the crowd of ghostly passengers and stabbed at the lobby button. The elevator doors closed just as Eleanor reached them, her inhuman scream echoing through the shaft. The elevator plummeted downward, but not in any normal way. David could feel it falling through space, through time, through dimensions of reality that shouldn't exist. The ghostly passengers stared at him with their black eyes, their mouths opening and closing without sound. Floor indicators flashed by in reverse. Negative floors, floors that existed only in nightmares. The basement, sub-basement, sub-sub-basement, levels that went deeper than any building should go. Finally, mercifully, the elevator stopped. The doors opened onto the Hartley Hotel lobby. Patricia Wells was standing there, looking concerned. "David? You've been up there for 3 hours. I was getting worried." David stumbled out of the elevator, his clothes soaked with sweat, his hands shaking uncontrollably. 3 hours? It had felt like minutes and eternity at the same time. "I need to leave," he said. "I need to leave right now." Patricia nodded understandingly. The 7th floor affects people differently. Some see things. Some hear things. Some, Well, some never come back the same. David packed his tools and left the Hartley Hotel that afternoon. He never went back. But he did some research, and what he found made his blood run cold. Over the hotel's 95-year history, 43 people had disappeared from the building. Guests who checked in but never checked out. Staff members who went to work and never came home. Maintenance workers who went to fix something and were never seen again. All of them had last been seen near the main elevator. The Hartley Hotel is still operating. They still don't rent rooms on the 7th floor. The main elevator still stops there randomly, opening its doors to an empty hallway. But sometimes, late at night, guests report seeing people in old-fashioned clothes getting on and off that elevator. People who don't appear on any guest registry. People whose reflections don't show up in mirrors. David Kim left the building maintenance business after his experience at the Hartley Hotel. He works in new construction now, buildings that don't have history, don't have secrets, don't have elevators that travel to floors that shouldn't exist. But he still has nightmares about Eleanor Hartley and her collection of permanent guests. And sometimes, in those dreams, he hears her voice echoing through dimensions of reality. Room 1847 is still available, David. It's waiting for you. The Hartley Hotel is still there, still welcoming guests, still hungry. The main elevator still works perfectly, according to all mechanical inspections. It just sometimes takes people where they never intended to go, and they never come back. Three stories of elevator terror, and we've saved the worst for last. Because what if I told you that sometimes the elevator isn't haunted by the dead? What if I told you that sometimes elevators can become possessed by something far more ancient and hungry than any human ghost? This last story will change how you think about elevators forever. It's about a place where the elevator shaft goes deeper than any building should go, and something climbs up from the depths that should have stayed buried forever. The Blackstone Research Facility was built in 1962 in the remote mountains of Colorado. It was a government installation, officially dedicated to geological surveys and seismic research. Unofficially, it housed projects that didn't exist on any public record. The facility was 12 stories above ground, but what made it unique was what lay beneath. The elevator shaft descended 47 floors underground, deeper than any civilian building in the world. And in September 2021, something went very, very wrong. Dr. Rebecca Torres was a seismologist who had been working at Blackstone for 6 months. She was brilliant, dedicated, and completely unprepared for what she would discover in the depths of that elevator shaft. Her specialty was deep earth monitoring, tracking seismic activity miles below the surface. She spent most of her time on sub-level 35, where the most sensitive equipment was housed. Every day, she took the main elevator down into the earth, deeper than most people ever go. The morning of September 15th started like any other. Rebecca arrived at Blackstone at 7 a.m., badged through security, and headed for the elevator bank. She pressed the call button for Elevator A, the main shaft that serviced all 47 underground levels. But when the doors opened, she noticed something odd. The elevator car was warm. Not just warm, hot, like it had been running continuously for hours. And there was a smell. Something sulfurous, like rotten eggs mixed with burning metal. Rebecca stepped inside and pressed the button for sub-level 35. The elevator began its long descent. Past the sub-basements, past the research levels, past the storage areas, deeper and deeper into the earth. But as the elevator passed sub-level 20, something changed. The lights flickered. The smooth hum of the elevator motor became irregular, stuttering, and Rebecca could swear she felt the elevator car swaying slightly, as if something was pushing against it from outside. Sub-level 25. Sub-level 30. The elevator was moving slower now, and the temperature was rising. Rebecca loosened her lab coat, feeling sweat beading on her forehead. The sulfur smell was getting stronger. Sub-level 35. The elevator should have stopped here. This was Rebecca's floor, her laboratory, her destination. But the elevator didn't stop. It kept going down. Rebecca pressed the button for sub-level 35 repeatedly. Nothing happened. She pressed the emergency stop button. Nothing. The elevator continued its descent, past levels she had never seen, past levels that weren't supposed to exist. Sub-level 40. Sub-level 45. Sub-level 47. The lowest official level of the facility. But the elevator kept going. Sub-level 50. Sub-level 60. The floor indicator was showing levels that couldn't exist. Blackstone only went down 47 floors. Rebecca had seen the building plans, had studied the geological surveys. There was nothing below sub-level 47 except solid bedrock. But the elevator continued its impossible descent. The heat was becoming unbearable now. Rebecca's clothes were soaked with sweat, and she could feel her skin burning. The metal walls of the elevator were hot to the touch. The sulfur smell was so strong it made her eyes water and her throat burn. And then she began to hear sounds from outside the elevator shaft. Not mechanical sounds, not the normal sounds of cables and counterweights and motors. These were organic sounds. Breathing, scratching, something that sounded almost like whispering. At first, Rebecca thought the sounds were coming from the facility's ventilation system, but as the elevator continued its descent, the whispers became clearer. They weren't words in any language she recognized, but somehow she understood their meaning. They were hungry. They had been waiting. They were coming up. The elevator finally stopped at what the indicator claimed was sub-level 100. This was impossible. They were now nearly a mile underground, far deeper than any human construction should go. The doors opened. Rebecca stepped out into a corridor that defied every law of physics and geology she knew. The walls weren't concrete or steel. They were carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. The air was thick and hot, like breathing soup, and the smell was overwhelming. The corridor stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness. Along the walls were openings, not doorways, but holes that seemed to have been clawed or chewed through the stone. From these openings came the sounds Rebecca had heard in the elevator shaft, but louder now, more insistent. As Rebecca stood frozen in terror, trying to process what she was seeing, something emerged from one of the holes in the wall. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was the color of dried blood, stretched tight over bones that bent in impossible directions. Its fingers ended in claws that scraped against the stone floor. Its face was a nightmare of too many eyes and too many teeth, all wrong, all hungry. "Welcome," it said, its voice like grinding stone. "We have been waiting so long for someone to come down. Someone to open the way back up." Rebecca tried to run back to the elevator, but the doors had closed. The call button didn't work. She was trapped a mile underground with something that shouldn't exist. "What are you?" she whispered. "We are what came before," the creature replied. "Before your kind walked above. Before the sun burned in the sky. We lived in the deep places, in the warm darkness below the world." More creatures began emerging from the holes in the walls, dozens of them, all different but all equally wrong. Rebecca pressed herself against the elevator doors, but there was nowhere to run. "Your kind buried us," another creature said, its voice like breaking glass. "Drove us deep with fire and iron and prayers to dead gods, sealed us in the deep places and forgot we existed. But we remember," said a third creature, this one tall and gaunt with arms that reached nearly to the floor. We remember the taste of sunlight on flesh. We remember the warm blood of the surface dwellers. And now you have built us a way back up? The first creature continued. Your elevator shaft boring through the stone, breaking the seals that held us down, creating a path from our prison to your world above. Rebecca realized with horror what they were saying. The Blackstone facility hadn't just been built for research. It had been built on top of something. Something that had been deliberately buried and sealed away thousands of years ago. And by drilling so deep, by creating an elevator shaft that went down into the Earth's depths, they had accidentally broken those ancient seals. We thank you, the creature said, and its smile was full of teeth like broken glass. Your kind has always been so helpful, even when you don't mean to be. The creatures began moving toward the elevator shaft. Rebecca watched in horror as they climbed the walls like spiders, disappearing up into the darkness above. They were going up through the elevator shaft, up toward the surface levels where her colleagues were working, unaware of what was climbing toward them. Rebecca pounded on the elevator doors, screaming for help. But her voice was lost in the sulfurous air of the deep corridor. Even if someone could hear her, she was a mile underground in a place that wasn't supposed to exist. She had to find another way up. She had to warn everyone. Rebecca began running down the corridor, looking for stairs, another elevator, any way back to the surface. Behind her, she could hear more creatures emerging from the holes in the walls. Their claws scraped against stone as they followed her, their hungry whispers echoing through the tunnels. The corridor branched and twisted, leading deeper into a network of tunnels that seemed to go on forever. Rebecca ran blindly, her lab coat streaming behind her, her lungs burning from the sulfurous air. Finally, she found what she was looking for. A service ladder, rusted with age, leading up through a narrow shaft. It had to be an emergency exit, something built when the elevator shaft was constructed. Rebecca began to climb. The ladder was old, and some of the rungs were loose, but it held her weight. She climbed past sub-level 99, past sub-level 98, up toward the surface and safety. But the creatures were following her. She could hear them in the shaft below, their claws scraping against the metal ladder, their breathing echoing up from the depths. They were climbing faster than she was, and they were gaining on her. Rebecca climbed faster than she had ever climbed anything in her life. Her hands were bleeding from gripping the rusted rungs. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Sub-level 80, sub-level 70. She was making progress, but the creatures below were getting closer. She could hear their hungry whispers getting louder. Sub-level 20, sub-level 10. Rebecca could see light above her now. Actual electric light from the facility's upper levels. She was almost there, almost safe. But as she reached sub-level 5, she heard something that made her blood freeze. The facility's fire alarm was going off. Emergency lights were flashing. And over the intercom, she could hear screaming. Some of the creatures had reached the surface before her. They had used the main elevator shaft, climbing up through the darkness while she had been running through the tunnels below. They were already in the facility, already among her colleagues. Rebecca pulled herself up through the last few levels and emerged onto sub-level 1, gasping and sobbing. The hallway was chaos. Emergency lights flashed red and white. The sprinkler system had activated, soaking everything in water, and from somewhere in the facility came sounds that no human throat could make. She ran for the main entrance, but the security doors had locked down automatically. The facility was in quarantine mode. Nothing could get out. Nothing could escape. Rebecca found a security office and barricaded herself inside. Through the security monitors, she watched as creatures that should not exist hunted through the hallways of Blackstone. Her colleagues, her friends, they didn't stand a chance. She used the emergency radio to contact the outside world, to warn them about what was happening. But who would believe her? Who would believe that an elevator shaft, had become a highway for ancient horrors to invade the surface world. 6 hours later, military vehicles surrounded the Blackstone facility. Soldiers in hazmat suits breached the building and found Rebecca still barricaded in the security office, the only survivor. The official report classified the incident as a catastrophic equipment failure that resulted in toxic gas exposure. 47 researchers and staff members were listed as casualties of chemical poisoning. The facility was sealed with concrete and steel. The elevator shaft was filled with cement all the way down to sublevel 47. The area was declared a contaminated zone, off limits to civilians. But Rebecca knew the truth. The creatures hadn't been destroyed. They had been buried again, sealed back in their deep prison. The cement in the elevator shaft was just another barrier, another seal to hold them down. For now, Rebecca left government service after her experience at Blackstone. She became a university professor, teaching geology to students who have no idea what lies beneath their feet in the deep places of the earth. But sometimes, late at night, she feels tremors through the ground, seismic activity that doesn't match any known geological patterns, movement from deep underground, as if something is testing the strength of its prison. And sometimes, when she's in an elevator, any elevator, she remembers the heat and the sulfur smell and the hungry whispers from below. She remembers that there are things older than humanity living in the deep places, things that are waiting for another chance to climb back up to the surface, things that remember the taste of sunlight on flesh. The Blackstone facility remains sealed, a concrete monument to humanity's tendency to dig too deep and ask too few questions. But other facilities are being built. Other elevators are descending into the Earth's depths. And somewhere, in the darkness below, ancient things are listening to the sound of drilling and excavation. They're waiting for someone else to build them a ladder back to the world above. They're very patient. They have all the time in the world. 4 stories, 4 elevators, 4 encounters with things that should never have been disturbed. Sarah Martinez learned that the dead don't always rest in peace. Sometimes they get trapped in the spaces between floors, calling out names of people they've never met. Jennifer Walsh discovered that the most dangerous predators are the ones who live across the hall, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. David Kim found out that some hotels collect more than just room fees from their guests. Some collect souls. And Dr. Rebecca Torres learned that humanity isn't alone in this world, and that some doors should never be opened, even accidentally. The next time you step into an elevator, remember these stories. Remember that you're entering a metal box suspended by cables over an empty shaft. Remember that you're trusting your life to machinery that could fail at any moment. But more importantly, remember that you're never really alone in an elevator. The spaces between floors are full of shadows, and shadows sometimes move when they shouldn't. So when those doors close and you begin your ascent or descent, listen carefully. Listen for the sounds that don't belong, the humming that isn't coming from the motor, the whispers that aren't coming from the speakers, the scratching that isn't coming from the cables. And if you ever find yourself in an elevator that stops on a floor that shouldn't exist, that opens onto a hallway you've never seen before, that takes you somewhere you never intended to go, remember that some journeys don't have a return ticket. Some elevators only go one way. Sweet dreams. And next time you're waiting for an elevator, maybe take the stairs instead. You never know who or what might be waiting for you between the floors. The doors are closing. Going up? If these stories made your skin crawl, like the video, it tells the algorithm you survived. Stop and subscribe, and turn on the bell. We drop new nightmares regularly. Share with someone brave, or someone who thinks they are. Comment below. We want to know what you would have done. Some stories don't end when the lights come on. This is Dread Dynasty. We'll see you in the next scare.